Thank you. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you to the U.S. Energy Association for once again inviting me to speak at this event. And I'm going to say just to at the beginning, you're going to hear a lot of echoes in my remarks of remarks you've already heard today. I mean, you've heard from Karen and Mike and Tom and Dina about the need for increased natural gas infrastructure and thus the need for permitting reforms. I'm going to say a lot of that as well. I actually thought that Jim's comments on reliability were spot on, and I'm going to talk about reliability as well. And then I just want to call out, if you have not had a chance to read EPRI's Net Zero 2050 analysis, I would suggest that you do. I thought it was very good, and I'll tell you my take, which I hope that Arshad would agree with. But my takeaway was you need natural gas. And now, granted, I think that the study envisions technologies to lower the carbon emissions. But at the end of the day, if you want to do this quickly and affordably, the answer is you need natural gas. I hope you would agree with that assessment. But that was certainly my reading of it, and so would offer that to others as well. So I am here representing the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America. And for those that maybe aren't as familiar, we are the interstate natural gas transmission pipelines. So we move the gas across the country from areas where it's produced to areas where it's consumed by a wide variety of end users. And, you know, we think of it as that really what my members do helps ensure that homes are heated, that they have the gas to be heated, that power plants can operate, and that the industry can invest in communities through the industrial renaissance that Dina referenced. So this is actually my first time speaking at USEA in person, but I have had the privilege to speak here before. And, you know, I looked back at my remarks last year, and I gotta tell you, I'm sad to say, feels like a lot of deja vu. We in many respects of where we are as a country, we haven't really progressed that much. Energy prices are still stubbornly high. The policy environment has only become more challenging for the U.S. energy industry to deliver the electrons and molecules that homes and businesses need. And over the past year, we've witnessed what happens when grid reliability is forced to take a back seat to unrealistic climate plans that seek to phase out fuel sources without a real consideration of either need or demand. We end up with rolling outages in California, narrowly avoided disasters in Texas, and calls for conservation on Christmas Day in the PJM region. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, at least some of those are examples were driven by extreme weather events, which is absolutely true, but also underscores my point. We need to place a higher priority on ensuring reliability so that we are prepared for heat waves and Arctic blasts and other extremes. Because a grid that is only reliable during nice weather is not reliable. Some advocates are erroneously pointing fingers at natural gas as the sole reason for these recent grid challenges. Since natural gas is, as has been mentioned, the largest fuel source for electric power generation in the United States. Unfortunately, that kind of simplistic and dubious narrative has now taken root in media reports and even in some policymaker discussions. To be clear, our grid is not strained because fuels like natural gas and its related infrastructure are somehow no longer reliable. It is strained because unrealistic climate plans have driven the push to electrify everything while also preventing the development of new power generation and needed energy infrastructure. That infrastructure is necessary to delivering those additional electrons. Think about that for a minute. Advocates and policymakers are pushing to connect more appliances, vehicles, and other devices to an already strained electric grid, while also eliminating the fuels used to generate most of the electricity. Again, 40% is coming from natural gas. Unrealistic climate policies are creating a rapid increase in demand and a precipitous decline in supply. So what do policymakers think is going to happen? We actually already know what's going to happen. On December 29th, the headline from Bloomberg News said it all. Big growth in electric heat sets stage for blackouts in the U.S. South. In the Carolinas and Tennessee, the number of homes using electric heat increased by 20% from 2009 to 2020. But electric power generation in that region has remained relatively flat. As temperatures dropped and more homes demanded electricity, the supply simply wasn't there. Had we invested in additional infrastructure to readily provide that added supply to the region, the outcome might have been different. A former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission said in response, "We've moved too swiftly over the last 2 decades to electrify residential heating." You don't say. Curiously, that Bloomberg report also suggested North Carolina's dependence on natural gas was part of the problem. Now, remind me, wasn't there a project called the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which would have delivered more natural gas to the state? That pipeline would have delivered an additional 1.5 BCF a day to the region. But wasn't that blocked due to the litigious efforts of some of the advocates now attacking natural gas as unreliable? That sounds an awful lot like what we're seeing in the Northeast, where political opposition to new natural gas pipelines was premised on the idea that choking off supply would somehow bring a clean energy utopia. Well, that hasn't exactly happened. Since New York rejected the water quality permit for the Constitution Pipeline back in 2016, the state's annual consumption of natural gas has increased by more than 22 billion cubic feet. Massachusetts is currently arguing with offshore wind developers over soaring cost, while importing billions of cubic feet of liquefied natural gas from Trinidad and Tobago. In Connecticut, policymakers acknowledge that rising energy costs are hitting families hard, with one state senator calling high prices unacceptable and cruel. Yet, there is comparative silence when it comes to recognizing that natural gas pipeline constraints, which have been created by political opposition, are the driving cause for those higher costs. Those constraints also increase emissions. On Christmas Eve, which was the worst day of Winter Storm Elliott for most of this region, the lack of adequate gas supply came into stark relief as power producers throughout the Northeast had to turn to other sources to keep the lights on. Compared to the previous day, coal use for power generation jumped 30%, while wind power fell by more than 40%. Now, solar power did surge, but the extra megawatt hours from solar panels was less than what fell off the grid from wind. What saved the Northeast from complete catastrophe on Christmas Eve was not the renewable energy technologies that state and federal policymakers have promised. Rather, it was oil, which increased 157% to become the leading fuel for power plants in the region that day, highlighting the discrepancies in the region's clean energy goals and the reality of the resources readily available and thus needed. Now, this isn't about attacking renewables. This is about the reality of how our electric grid operates. Meeting the energy demands of the world's largest and most complex economy will require a diverse set of fuel types, as Dina said, all of the above. And that's how you create resilience in the system, which is how you ensure reliability. It's not a stretch to say that we could solve many of the region's energy challenges if we built a pipeline to carry natural gas from the Marcellus Shale into New England. ISO New England, which operates the regional grid, has an entire page on their website entitled Natural Gas Infrastructure Constraints. in which they describe how a lack of pipelines carrying natural gas into the region contributes to less reliability, higher emissions, and higher energy costs. Without question, a diverse fuel mix should include technologies like wind and solar, which have an important role to play in a cleaner energy future. But as I've said before, we also need to recognize that the intermittent nature of these technologies is going to require robust natural gas infrastructure to ensure reliability. In fact, there's extensive research showing that natural gas and renewables are complementary energy sources that provide lower emissions, lower costs, and greater reliability. Last month, the U.S. Energy Information Administration released data showing that if the power sector had remained the same as it was in 2005, nearly 1 billion metric tons of additional carbon dioxide would have been emitted in 2021. Over half of the emission savings was a result of the power sector shifting from higher emitting fuels to natural gas. Restricting access to affordable fuels like natural gas doesn't save the planet. It contributes to blackouts. It forces families to pay more for their energy bills. And in the greatest irony of all, it can lead to higher emissions of greenhouse gases. Moving forward, if we want to increase reliability and reduce emissions, we all have a critical role to play: the industry, states, grid operators, and others. But we need to face some facts. To start, there needs to be some basic accountability. I think Jim mentioned that earlier as well. States are enacting policies and climate commitments that are completely unrealistic. Mandating more intermittent resources while discouraging investment in the fuels that can back them up is only going to continue to strain the grid. Additionally, when we experience blackouts and power outages, we can't just point fingers at the energy companies. There needs to be an honest and open-minded understanding of the origin of the problem and accountability for those who cause that problem. Fuel scarcity is often the result of inadequate infrastructure, which itself is often the result of the inability to secure the necessary permits to build that infrastructure. We know the Northeast is supply constrained not due to a lack of available natural gas in the United States. Actually, we have the Marcellus right next door. But the regulatory decisions and bad policies have contributed to this problem, and it's preventing families in the region from accessing that fuel. To be clear, we, INGAA, are for smart policies that reduce the carbon intensity of our grid. But those policies need to incorporate reliability, and they should be about actual emissions reductions, not about arbitrarily favoring certain fuel sources. I'm going to say it the way Karen said it. If this is a conversation about reducing emissions, we're all in. But if this is really a conversation about phasing out natural gas, no, that's not the conversation we need to be having. Now, as been mentioned, we need meaningful, and I'm going to use Jim's word, meaningful permitting reform, particularly for energy infrastructure. The average project review under NEPA takes nearly 5 years. And there was recently an estimate that found that that is increasing by an average of more than a month a year. Now, many of these overly aggressive climate policies mandate that emissions be cut in half or more by the end of this decade. But how are we going to meet those goals when every major infrastructure project, not just pipeline project, but power lines, renewable infrastructure projects, is going to take half a decade to get reviewed? We'll never be able to create a new 21st century energy system fueled by cleaner, more reliable, and more affordable energy if we stay in a permitting regime that was designed in the era of the rotary phone. So, just quickly take a moment to recap. We are the world's largest economy, the largest oil and natural gas producer, the largest producer of nuclear power, and our renewable energy capacity is growing at breakneck speed. Yet our system is strained like never before. Clearly, that's not because we lack the energy resources. Rather, it's driven by a policy environment that discourages investments in infrastructure and new production, while also mandating results that are devoid of reality. We have a complex energy system here in the United States, and like with anything, a diverse fuel mix is what we should pursue. Across the country, we have a wide range of weather patterns and local concerns, and access to certain resources can vary. Our energy policy should be built on those facts instead of trying to deny them. And while natural gas is not the only option we should pursue, the men and women of the interstate natural gas pipeline industry can and must play a critical role in the future of American energy. Through their hard work, we have proven that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and continue to supply natural gas to consumers across the country. We don't have to accept the reliability challenges we're currently facing, but we do have to address them, and we can't keep doing the same thing and hoping for different results. INGAA's members are solutions-driven, and they are the ideal partners as we all work together to create a more affordable, cleaner, and reliable energy system in the future. Thank you.